There we go. Okay. So, welcome back. This is our third Tuesday Indian Ed for All gathering, Indian education for all across the content. If you joined us last year, or if you watched one of our videos from last year, we covered many different content areas, 8 of them to be exact, last year. And hopefully this year we'll be able to do 8 more. They will always be on Tuesdays, the third Tuesday at 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And we will put a whole bunch of stuff in the chat for you to sign in, for you to take a renewal unit survey at the end if you would like renewal units, as well as any resources that the presenters have provided. So tonight, our presenter has provided a wonderful list of resources. So tonight is social studies. I am so excited to welcome JC Jeffers. As that name may sound a little bit familiar, her sister Julie is one of our new Indian Ed for All implementation specialists. So I am just delighted. JC is from Billings. She is an advocacy award recipient, the Teresa Veldkamp Advocacy Award for Excellence in Indian Education. She's a recipient of that award a few years ago, and an instructional coach at Billings. And she just contributes some of the most wonderful things and strategies for Indian Ed for All implementation. JC, I'm so glad you're here, and it is all yours if you need. And I need to make you you can share your screen. So thank you so much for being here, and I will be here with you every step of the way. So if there are any tech issues, you just hit me up. And at the end, the last 7 minutes or so, we will open it up for questions. But in the meantime, please feel free to throw anything in the chat if it's a resource that you're, hey, did you know about this, or a question, or a great comment. Feel free to make those in the chat. And JC, thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see you, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. You're always so amazing and always give such a great introduction. I was kind of hoping Julie was going to be here tonight. I'm like disappointed. I don't get to see her anymore. I'm like, where is Julie? I'm going to share my
She had to go get her
screen.
doggy from the vet.
Oh, which one?
Everything's okay.
Okay, thank you. Oh my gosh. I'm there we go. Okay, I want to share that one. I have so many there. I'm gonna put it back over here. There we go. There we go, kids. Okay. We are IFA across the content. So in my former life, I was a social studies teacher before I did this. I'm gonna go back. Why is it? Escape. Oh, sorry, wrong one. That's not working either. Go away. Escape. There we go. Here we go. Hello. So in my former life, I was a social studies teacher. I'm a recovering social studies teacher. That's what I kind of like to say. I might go back to that at some point in my life and maybe teach some Native American studies, but not anytime soon. That's where I started in my life and my career. This is my 25th year in education, and I've been in this current position for 9 years. And so just a little bit of background before we start. Some background on me. Not all tribal members look the same, right? And so I am a descendant of the Little Shell Chippewa, and I might not look like a typical tribal member. So maybe that comes as a surprise to you, or maybe it doesn't. And so, how about we start out right away? And in the chat, if you could tell me, all you wonderful people, let's get you going and awake. Make sure you're here and awake. What essential understanding would that statement be? So you can just type what number it would be. What essential understanding would that statement be? Not all tribal members look the same. So what essential understanding would that be? Go ahead and type in the chat. What essential understanding? Nice. Say it. And it could be more than one. Not all tribal members are the same. Got individual diversity, 3, 1, 2. I do, Shirley, I'm going to agree with you on that one. I do think it falls more under 2. I think it is individual diversity. I think it can be others as well. I don't think there's, so many of the essential understandings obviously come together. So, but I feel like it really does go under 2. Number 1, remember, is tribes are different, and then number 2 is individual members are different. But obviously, it can be others as well, but I think it falls mostly under number 2. Let's go to the next. This is a really good resource that I have that I've used for a really long time. And when you think about working with Indigenous students, this is just a resource that I like to share with teachers. And a lot of folks will look at this and they're like, oh man, I feel like I'm already doing this. And I think that that's really important. And when you look at the research that Klug and Whitfield had done in 2003 in this book, Widening the Circle. And this is one of the first things that Glenda McCarthy had shared with me when I kind of started my journey about 15 years ago when I first started doing this work. And I thought, man, I do a lot of this stuff. I feel like I'm really hitting the mark. And one of the things that I really found that I did in a lot of the work that I did is not allowing for a lot of free time and just making sure that my students had things to do. Even in high school, like centers in high school and things and projects for students to be constantly working on. And I think in social studies, it's really, really, really important. And not always calling on students. And I think in social studies, we have a tendency to fall into a trap of lecture, vocab, quiz, maybe a movie, and then, we're through the unit. And I approach social studies in a very different way. And so I'm going to kind of give you some of those things today. Hopefully, we can get to some of those with Klug and Whitfield. Not all students know their culture or want to share. I was a kid who wanted to share, and I wanted to share everything about my culture. And it was cool to be an Indian when I was growing up. But that's not always the case. And so just kind of keep that in mind as you're going through, and don't rely on your students to teach your Indian ed or be the expert in the classroom. Try to be tribally specific whenever possible. It's one of the first questions I ever get is what, terms do I use? Obviously, trying to use, tribally specific whenever possible. And what the tribes call themselves. Can anybody, those are my little stop signs to remind me to make it interactive. So can anybody tell me what grade in Montana students are supposed to know the names of all the tribes? What grade are students supposed to know the names of all the tribes? What grade? Third, fourth, third, third, third. Yeah, it is third grade, guys. Third grade. We are on a mission right now. We decided that we took everything off kindergarten, first, and second. And we're just going to focus on that. The kids are going to know the names. They're going to know the names, where they're at. We've even gone so far, we're like, we're just going to put big mats in the room. And I just threw my thing. We're just going to put big mats in the room, and kids are going to know the locations and the names. And we're just going to focus on that. And we think it's a really good place to start because it's about location and place and being able to kind of build these concepts around Montana. We like it, and we're pretty excited to kind of focus on that. And I'm going to show you a little bit about where we're going as a district. Indigenous peoples is my preferred term, and I have an article right here that goes with that. And this is from Dr. Pee Wee Lardy out of Oklahoma, and he is going to be at MFPE. Right now, we're working with Amanda Curtis, and she wrote, this is their second year in the CAPE grant, and he is going to be a keynote speaker on Friday. So if you can go see him, he is amazing. And then I have a session, a social studies session that would be really, Cornell. He's amazing. And he talked this, he convinced me wholeheartedly why we should use Indigenous peoples. It's so amazing. He is amazing. If you get a chance to see him at MFPE, go see him. And please come see my session from 2 to 5. I'm going to share the resource today that I'm going to use. But if you want to see that resource in action, my session will be 2 to 5 on Thursday. And so he talks a lot about indigenizing our minds. So he takes Banks's multicultural education model and kind of indigenizes it a little bit more, and talks about, he comes from a state where you cannot and are not supposed to teach culture. And he really challenges us in how we approach that. So he does some really good work down there in Oklahoma, and he's done some really great things. And Amanda's done a really good job bringing him to the state. So if you get a chance to see him, go see him. And please read Chris Lattre's book, Becoming Little Shell, because I got to put in a plug for Chris Lattre, always. Today, we're going to talk about some strategies. I'm going to show you some strategies that I used in social studies and have borrowed over the years, and some amazing social studies teachers we have here in Billings. They are not the right way or the only way. They're just one way to do things. And, you know, there's lots of other ways to do things out there. I also like to talk about and use this platform to talk about sharing and how important it is that we share with each other, and that, you know, you can use these things in any way you want. I make them at work, I make them for my business, I make them for OPI, and I wouldn't be here without standing on the shoulders of giants, so you can use them however you want. The other thing I think is important is IFA is not about shame and blame, it's about inclusivity and empathy. And I think what we do is a lot about building empathy, and I think that's really, really important. And we can't build empathy with our students if we don't have empathy for our colleagues. And we want to avoid the crabs in the bucket mentality. And if you don't know what that is, I'm going to tell you. Oh, wait.
I have to put that away.
They read this book, will they have a prosperous life?
Absolutely not. What you will have is a different attitude in your approach to becoming prosperous. That's what this book will do. This book will simply make you stay true to your dream. It will make you be determined to find the successful version of yourself. At the end of the day, I want people to be better. That's why I'm sharing this information. I don't want to be successful by myself. There's enough success in the world for everybody. Everybody should be able to get a piece. And I think that if everybody adapts that mindset, that our world will ultimately become a better place. Right now, it's a crab in a barrel mentality. And it takes people to speak up about being positive, about bringing people closer together. And that's what I do, man.
What is a crab? What is a crab in a barrel mentality? You lost
A crab in a barrel. You put a bunch of crabs in a barrel. Yeah. Every crab that tries to climb out of the barrel, there's another crab that's going to grab that crab and pull him back in. Eventually, no crabs can get out the barrel because they're all pulling each other back down because they're all trying to get to the top. No crab is helping. How do you not know that? I don't.
Don't be a crab in a barrel.
Don't be a crab in a barrel. Can't pull each other down. There's lots of room for everybody to have success. So everybody's success. Yes, I'm going to show you some featured tools that we have here in Billings. It's just, I just think it's really important that we all pull each other up and that we're pulling each other out of the bucket. We find this a lot in Indigenous communities. Women, we do this to each other too. So we're just, we're not going to do that here with each other. So it's just really important. It's kind of my mantra of the year is no crabs in the bucket mentality. Yay! Feature tools, I have some of those that I'm going to share with you today. We're going to share in the chat box, make copies, use however you want. And please use in a good way and give credit if you can. I will try to give credit to everybody that I'm using and borrowing from today. And if you forget, that's okay too. I don't really care. And reaffirm the things that you are already doing. I really hope that we can do that today. And then hopefully we'll be able to have some questions at the end and I don't talk too much. That's the one downfall of social studies teachers. We really like to talk a lot. I apologize. Okay, so social studies core, I want you to kind of be looking for these things throughout. So in social studies, you know, we have to make ourselves relevant. And I cannot stress this enough. Every time I go into social studies PLCs, we are not tested directly. So we really need to be teaching reading, writing, speaking, listening. Everything at the core of what we are doing has to be around those skills, I think personally. If we want to stay relevant, we should be teaching these skills, and everything that we're teaching should be revolving around those skills. This is important too, that time isn't always linear. Too often, I think we start, you know, in one place and we just go through. And I think that if we can not always delineate time and space, where we start at the beginning and we go to the end, or we just randomly pick places, because too often we look at it as 1961 and then 1962, and I think it's hard for kids to imagine why allotment from, you know, the 1880s and 90s still affects reservations today. And so when we stop delineating time and look at it in a more circular way, kids can start to see how those things affect us today. Why is, you know, history repeat itself and history's so dumb? But you know what adults do? The more thing that they pay attention to the most is social studies and the news. And let's face it, if we're going to save democracy, it's going to be social studies. Allow for inquiry, right? Asking questions and allowing students to pursue things on their own. Of course, we need to know our content standards. This is wild. When we wrote these, right? And it's so sorry, I'm gonna do the scroll of death here. It's so disappointing people to say, oh my gosh, they're so big. We wrote them big on purpose. Nowhere in here does it say, no, the Battle of Shiloh. No, there's nothing specific in here. And we did that for a reason, because that's not what social studies really is. And it's so disappointing that we keep going back to it, because we really want people to start thinking about social studies in a more holistic way. Hopefully we can keep moving in that direction, but explaining the roles of producers and consumers and market systems, that can be done in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different contexts. And that's what we want people to be able to do. And when people are like, oh, I hate the social studies standards, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take that personally, because I think I specifically helped write that standard right there. And so I try to help people to better understand how we wrote the standards and why we wrote them the way that we did. And so hopefully I can help you with that a little bit today. I don't know why I was going to stop there, so I'm going to forget about it. Essential understanding 6. I think this is really, if we were going to take an essential understanding, I think this is the core understanding of social studies. And so what I'd like you to do is read that, and then in the chat, put one word that really stands out to you from that understanding. What is the core word of this understanding? What is the core word? History is a story most often related through the subjective experience of the teller. With the inclusion of more and varied voices, histories are being rediscovered and revised. History told from the American Indian perspectives frequently conflict with the stories of mainstream historians tell. Subjective. Decolonization. Rediscovered. Experience. Yeah. And one thing I really like with these is we had done like Wordles with these. My favorite word in this is perspective. I think that viewpoint, oh, thanks, Julie, subjective, and we break apart that word pretty in depth. And I don't even know adults sometimes. You know, we talk about it in our PLCs, and people will say that the history book is not subjective and that Indigenous history is subjective. And so we will talk about that, and we will work through that and talk about why all history is subjective. And that perspective is really, really difficult for people to switch, or not switch, to work through, because the indigenized mindset is it's hard to, we've only seen things through one lens. I remember for a long time I thought that I was hearing other stories in my house, of course, of Sitting Bull, but I remember learning from my grandma about Sitting Bull and the Little Shell running guns for Sitting Bull, and that we harbored him up in Canada and we were hiding him. But nobody ever told me what happened to the Lakota and the Northern Cheyenne after the Battle of Little Bighorn or Greasy Grass. And I didn't understand. I was like, but they won. So why did they have to go back to the reservation? And nobody ever told me. And then I got to college and I was like, what? Why? I just felt like I'd been lied to, right? And I don't think that kids should have to get to college to hear the other side of the story. And we still have history textbooks, right, that don't tell the whole story. So it is our responsibility to make sure that the full story is being told, right? Because the history books aren't going to give us that full story. So some strategies, right? Jigsaw is my favorite strategy. Hexagon is another one that I'm going to show you. Timeline strategy has been around forever. Inquiry projects are my favorite. So I'm not really concerned what side or their views are. What I'm concerned about is whether or not they can reference their opinions with valid and reliable sources. Students often hold misconceptions about Indigenous peoples only because they haven't been exposed to enough non-examples of those stereotypes. So we disrupt their schemas in positive and safe spaces with activities so they can rely on valid and authorized sources for their information and opinions. One of the best resources that OPI has that you can work through with kids is evaluating materials and resources. I worked through those sources with kids. I worked through them with teachers. I actually turned all of them into check sheets. I have them all in check sheets so teachers can go through and evaluate resources with a check sheet. You can do it, kids can do it as they're doing research, and they can say, oh, this is good because it has this is not good because it doesn't have that. And so I have all of those available in check sheets as well. So there's ways that you can use those to walk through kids, but I'm, as long as they can pull it from a source, I'm not as concerned about what their opinion is, as long as they can verify their source. And so we spend a lot of time on verifying and authorizing their source. So Jigsaw, I mean, we're going to kind of work through these, but not, I'm just going to, you should be familiar, hopefully, with some of these, but I'm going to kind of show you how we do them with EFA task. So Jigsaw is an activity where it's kind of a time, when you have a time constraint or a big document where students take pieces and they kind of become experts on these different pieces, and then they share with each other. So each group or individual is assigned a section to read. Even better if they can choose their own section, right? So they have choice. Always give a task to complete while they're reading. So this is really important too. So you give them a reading strategy. Don't just give them the reading. And super easy, just go Google any reading strategy. I'm giving you one here that I really, really like to use. You can use any reading strategy that you can Google or come up with. I've given you one here just in case you don't have one off the top of your head. I use dice for tons and tons of things. So something that disturbed them, something that intrigued them, something that they're curious about, something that enlightened them. And then always ask them to reflect on the time that passed. So I always ask them, so anytime that I'm asking them to read something that was, 1851, how much time has passed between now and then? Or how many generations? And so putting into perspective how much time has passed between now and then, not numbers, just, is it generations? They can do numbers, but just, is this a long time? Is this a little bit of time? Is this something that would be within your lifetime that could have happened? A story that I tell students a lot is about how my great grandfather was born in a teepee on the Marias River and died in 1969 in a hospital in Harlem while a man was walking on the moon. And so the time that passed in his lifetime is astronomical. So how much time has passed? And so that's something that we try to think about, right? Because the time that passes in your lifetime can be more important than the amount, the number that's attached to it. We focus too much on the numbers sometimes, and that's a way of indigenizing your mind. I think that that's a part of Indigenous ways of knowing. Another example of that is something that my sister and I discovered that was really interesting that we didn't know other people had, is that when we were little, we didn't understand that people go January, February, March, April, May, and that they do it in a line. And people are like, yep, and then you start back over at January. Well, I always saw it as a circle, but I didn't know that other people didn't see it as a circle, right? Or that people, you grow up and you think that other people see the world that you do, and then you realize that they don't. And so when you're teaching social studies is like science. And when I see the world as non-linear, it can be really hard in a social studies class to conceptualize some of the things that are happening in social studies. And I still struggle with social studies sometimes too, because it's so linear. And I don't know if that helps anybody in any way at all, but it might help you with Indigenous students. Just another kind of tidbit, because I'm helping you here a little bit with achievement, but also a little bit with your social studies class, hopefully. I'm not going on too much of a tangent here. So thinking about Jigsaw, trying to not always make things so linear. So what I do, I love Fort Peck for this one. So you take this, just because it has really big chunks, you can take big chunks, kids work on this chunk as a group, and then they become an expert on this little chunk of time, and then they teach it to other groups. And so they're becoming experts on this part of Fort Peck, and then they teach it to the other groups. It's kind of a way to break up time. It's a way to become experts on a little area. If you can take the time off of these, it's even better. So if you can break this up, sorry, if you can take the time off, so Fort Laramie Treaty was amended, the Judith River, so you take this time off and give them the chunk. Yes, I'll share. It's on my big document, and then it has all of them. So you'll have a copy of them. And so and then they're talking about it, and I cannot tell you how much comes out of this. It's just wild how much they're like, this happened, like this is what was going on. I don't understand. And their schemas are so disrupted, and what comes out of it is amazing. And the kids, the conversations that they have and these connections they start drawing. And then they start looking at other reservations in other time periods, and they start drawing these connections, and they're like, oh, this was going on at Fort Peck, and this was going on in the Blackfeet, and this was going on at Crow, and this was going on here. And they start to draw these connections in the different places, and taking the time off puts things into perspective for them, because then they start to understand that these things did not happen very long ago. They happened very, like, people that are living in their kids' houses right now still have grandparents and great grandparents that went to boarding schools living in their houses. So I think we have to remember that, and it puts things into perspective sometimes for people. That word again, perspective. So Jigsaw is a really good way to do that with those timelines. When I first learned it, I learned it from Jordan and Miranda, and they did it with federal policy periods. Super powerful with those. A little bit higher level, but extremely powerful. This hexagon one, again, same kind of thing. You take the time off, you use the reservation timelines, you can do it with any topic. You take the event, and so I just kind of did it real quick so you could see it. And what you do is you don't connect the event, you connect two things. So you connect like war to nest. So you connect things together that don't necessarily aren't connected, but you make connections between words just to try to draw connections between things. It's a schema connection. There shouldn't be anything that you don't necessarily already kind of understand to do, but you're pre-assessing where they're at and what they already know. But you might do like Hill and Custer, because you know that Custer was in the Civil War and he was at Bunker Hill or something, or Grass with Little, and it doesn't even have anything to do with history. Or maybe you just connect Little and Little together, and so you form a schema map, and you have to kind of justify and decide why you have put these things together. Maybe you put soldiers with Miles, and so you can do these different things, and you kind of make them obscure. and allow students to make these connections. And then what I do is I do it again at the end and have them make a new one and see the difference between the two. And JC's talking a lot, so she's going to move on. That's the second one. This one is, I can't see them because the thing is, oh, the timeline. So this one, you break up the events, kind of like the first one of Jigsaw. So I guess I kind of mix those two together. So, but you make the timeline. This one is where you make the timeline. So this video is from Miranda and Jordan from OPI, and they explain in this video, if you haven't watched these videos. Oh, yep. What's up, Jen?
I don't think you're on the screen that you think you're on. So you may need
Oh,
to
shoot.
make sure that you're sharing. We're still on
Oh,
on the
shoot.
timeline this whole time, and I just tuned into that.
Thank you. Shoot. Okay, let me pull this up. I'm just gonna stop sharing and then share again. Thank you. No, but thank you. Ooh, it's because it's not going. Stop. There we go. Screen share. There we go. No, it went away. Oh, that's my world. Timeline activity is super cool. What you do with that is you break them up. Jordan and Miranda have a video on OPI. If you haven't ever watched those videos, I mean, Jen's been doing this for years. And all those videos, man, I've listened to them over and over again, like podcasts. And you, there we go. You go through them. I go through them and I just listen to them over and over again for a very long time. And you can, this one, she has, there we go. Can you see my thing now? No. Can you see it? Can you see my slideshow?
I see slideshow timeline activity page.
Perfect. So these videos, this video, so on that video, it explains the timeline. And so you break it up, and then, and I love it for Absolica. So I like this one particularly when it's close to you, because there's just something about the connections drawn when it's closer to you, where the hexagon is like when they're away from you. I don't know why. I don't know why. And maybe that's just anecdotal and it doesn't have anything to do with it. But in the video, they explain how to do it. And so, and the directions are here. And I use this, they used it for federal policy. I use it with all of the reservation timelines, and I think it's fabulous. And so, and this, I just kind of gave you an example. And so you set up a timeline that has these reference points, and you break it up without times on them, and then you put them on there. And it's super powerful. And I'll do it at MFPE too with the federal policy periods, and then I take it into my gallery walk. But when the kids do it, so these are pieces from the Absolica timeline. And then the kids kind of predict, they're like, the tribe sold Yellowtail Dam site. Well, I know South Station of Franz Ferdinand, so I think it was maybe here. And then they kind of predict, and they just decide where they're going to put them. And I think this was here. And then you give them the answers later, and they're like, oh my gosh, Native people didn't get the right to vote until 1924. Boarding schools lasted all the way till 1971, and it just really disrupts the schema. And Jordan and Miranda do a fabulous job of explaining it in their video, and it's an amazing way, and I love it for the reservation timelines I think it's one of the most powerful things you can do in a classroom. This last one, I think it is really, really, you become the expert in the topic. So you take something complex. Okay, so you take any standard, you teach the standard. So I think it's one of the hardest things to do sometimes is find the source that you want. So here's a standard: explore complex civilizations and the identity elements of change continuity across historical eras in Montana, the Americas, and world history. There's nothing in there about IFA, but this is my standard. Well, I want to do something. I know that there's stories about people having to move in Montana, but I can't find anything. So I call Mike Jetty and I'm like, hey, are there some stories out there about people having to move in Montana? I know there are, but I can't find a resource and I want to build this resource. And then Mike Jetty says, yeah, there's the Salish Trail of Tears. So then he gives me the source. So then I become the expert in it. And I teach the kids about the Salish Trail of Tears. And then the kids, oh, you don't want that. You don't want that. The kids go and then they research about their other displacement stories that are all over the world. And so I shy away from research IFA projects because unless you have very clear sources for them to research, we have some stuff that we have done in our scope and sequence that very clearly line out how to do research projects with kids, that a teacher has put together for us. But we're really cautious with that because we feel like it's kind of a lazy way to do your Indian education for all. We feel like you should be the expert, and just having kids go become the experts is not necessarily how we want it to. It can be done that way. We just want it to be a little bit more rigorous. And so they go do the research on other displacement stories of people all over the world. But and you're going to have students that are Indigenous that might go do things on their own, or a Crow student and he knows the story of the different agencies for the Crow tribe. But there's a lot of misinformation out there, and you're going to have to do a lot of putting out fires and is this a good source? So if you don't have those sources really lined out, it's just going to be really hard to manage that. So you teach this displacement story, there's your IFA. And then if you do have one or two kids that want to do displacement stories, you can manage that. And then, so it's a little bit more easy to navigate. We did it with ethnobotany today. So the teacher was teaching about the chokecherry, and he was teaching about the tools and the medicine and the stories of the chokecherry. And then the kids were doing their own relationships with plants. And then they were doing a little bit of exploring on the tribe. But instead of researching and just going out and researching on plants, although there is a lot of information, they were just kind of building their own relationships with plants. And so it wasn't just research on plants and tribes, because then it becomes a little bit harder to navigate too. So you becoming the expert on this topic, and then kids get to go research topics that they like to know about. I did it a lot in psychology that way too. So I would teach about the religion and Sundance or something, and then kids would go research other religions. And so I would teach the IFA, and then kids would go research other topics that were related to that and go into the world. So I was the expert and they would research things related to that topic. I hope that makes sense. I felt like it was a good way to approach it, because then I felt like it was just not too far to just kept kids in a place to go. So I did this with jurisdiction too. So this is what we did in government. So like I became the expert on tribal jurisdiction, and then kids went and looked up So I created this because this was how I figured out sovereignty. I was like, I don't understand it. What is it? And so I created this because I needed to become the expert. So I was like, oh my God, jurisdiction, what is it? So I figured it out. I created this thing for jurisdiction. And then the kids went and they figured out, they went and figured, oh my God. Oh, every single one of them. There we go. I'm just gonna pull this up. So then they went and researched like sovereignty violations in, you know, like Amnesty and other places in the world. I mean, it was high level 12th grade students, but it was a really good way for them to, an entry point for them to start looking at like they looked at, you know, South Korea and Kuwait and things like that. So just real quick, I'm going to share these with you. So this is my gallery walk. This is a resource that I have made that I'm going to feature at MFPE. This has, it is literally 275 pages of like every single, this took me actually my whole 10 years that I've been in Indian Ed. It has, and so if you go like one, and it'll take you back to that table of contents. And so it has every document I could think of that I thought fit into each one of these periods. And it's a gallery walk, the whole thing. My favorite thing I've ever made. Black Hills Are Not for Sale. This is a document that Cheyenne made. It is amazing. She is also teaching it at, it's not coming up right now, but it's there. You just need to make a copy of it. She's teaching that at MFPE too. This is another history teacher that also teaches art. This is an amazing tool as well. It's so cool. It's bringing art and history together, and it's about activism. All of these are about activism. We say you can't teach history without AIM. You can't teach IFA and history without AIM. So there you go. I made a new tribal territories map, so you can use this if you want. And it talks about tribal lands holding by the Little Shell. So I updated it with Little Shell stuff. And then this is our big thing right now. So we just launched this today. So this is our scope and sequence. It has every single resource that is School District 2, made by School District 2 with some OPI. And it has everything that we have made with the help of OPI and all of their grants that they've given us over the years, all aligned K-12 resources. And then these are all asynchronous resources that we have for teachers to do on their own in toolkits. So you can go through and do these as tasks. So like this is the one that Brooke made last year. So you can go through and like you could do these on your own day one as a group of teachers, and you could go through and do this as a group and asynchronously do this as a group of teachers, like in a professional development. And so I wanted to share that with you today. So I'm done. Question? Stop sharing. I did it. I stayed within my time.
Awesome. I was wondering, can you talk a little bit more about the gallery walk? Like, what does that look like? How much prep is involved?
It's really more meant for you. Okay, so we teach the whole thing at the beginning to all social studies teachers. So I give them the whole thing, but because social studies is broken up, right? So 8th grade only uses parts of it because the federal policy periods only fit with certain parts. And then other policy periods, so some of it goes with 8, some of it goes with 11, and then some of them use it for different literature pieces. So they can pull out whatever they want. There's also a teaching guide that they can use it for literature. So the 275 pages, you can just pull out whatever policy periods you want. So if you just want colonization, you can pull that out. If you just want, self-determination, you can pull that out. If you just want the treaties, you could just pull out the Treaty of Fort Laramie if you wanted. So The prep, I mean, to hang it up, it takes, it takes a good amount of time. But I would never do the whole thing in a class. Like that, it's just the teaching part that takes a long time for me. But as a PD, like I teach it to the whole social studies, K-12, and that takes 3 hours. So does that answer your question? But as far as like teaching it to social studies in the group, so if I was teaching it to kids in my social studies US history class, every time I would have 3. And so I would just teach that policy period at the beginning and then keep it up in my classroom as I was teaching that part of social studies, and then just leave it up, and then we would reference it all the way through. You're muted.
Thank you. So at this point in time, I'm actually going to stop the recording, and I would really encourage you teachers, you have a